lack of votes for Sandy override, which is very disappointing. I mean, that bill passed unanimously in both houses, and then it comes back, and we didn't have a single Republican vote because the governor had vetoed the bill, and all of a sudden what was a good bill before it hit the governor's desk has become a bad bill that they can't support. And you and I know that collectively we have done a horrible job in response to Hurricane Sandy from day two. Day one, I thought the governor did a good job of providing leadership during the storm, and in the literally the day or so afterwards when the president came in and they put a unified front and put politics aside and said, we're going to do everything we can to rebuild New Jersey. But from the next day, when the governor, and I specifically recall when the governor said, if you're going to rebuild to the flood, the new FEMA maps. And I and others started screaming, the maps are wrong. And the maps were wrong, and we all know this, Don. And yet the governor just held to that position, built to the new FEMA maps. So there are literally people in Atlantic County, people up and down the coast, who raised their homes, who didn't need to, raised them higher than they needed to, went to all that expense, and then find out, well, the maps have changed, and you really didn't need to do what you did. So, and that was the first error, and there have been so many others since. They hired firms. Ashbridge came in, and they were going to be the answer, and they did a horrible job. And then the next firm came in and rejected 80% of applicants who had reasons to make application, who upon review, the rejection was reversed. And again, you know these people, Don. They call your show. They're your neighbors in Brigantine. People who had spent money on repairing their home were rejected because they didn't meet the financial threshold. And one guy said, I didn't spend $8,000. My cost is going to be $80,000. So to put a Bill of Rights in, as Senator Sweeney called it, to give some protection and be able to provide some answers to these people, again, it was a good idea. It was good enough to be unanimously passed, but the governor says no, and everybody falls in line on the Republican side.
Now Connors up in Ocean County. He voted for the initial bill, and but he also wouldn't vote to override the veto. And he said that the bill could put federal funding in jeopardy. Did you see any reason why that was?
Well, there's a clause in the bill that says that if there are any conflicts with federal law, that the federal law would supersede whatever's in the bill. Now, part of the problem here, Don, is that there is confusion with regard to some of the federal regulations where you get, it seems like one set of regulations from FEMA and another set of regulations from HUD and back and forth. But the hope was, and I've spoken to Senator Sweeney on this, was for us to put as strong as bill possible forward in terms of protecting the rights and the ability of individual homeowners to get support. Let's give them as much support as possible. And even if there is a conflict, we know the federal law is going to supersede. That clause is in the bill. But also, it's an opportunity to point out to the federal government where some of their policies really don't make sense. And one that is very egregious to me is, if you were able to do the repairs on your own, you're not eligible in terms of cost. You're not eligible to recapture any of that cost. Well, it's now 20 months in. I know people. I know you know people. Again, who live in Atlantic County or Cape May County or further up the coast, who were after the storm. They may have stayed in a motel for a little bit, and then they moved in with in-laws or other family members or whatever. In one case, local fireman says, I have 2 kids. We spent our first Christmas out of the house right after the storm. The second year, he said, we're not doing it. We're not doing it anymore. We'll borrow the money. We'll fix up the home. We'll go back in. We'll take our chances, because it was costing them money to live where they were living, where they were renting something, and so on. So, I think that's a regulation that the federal government really needs to revisit. I don't have a problem when you base the help and support that people get somewhat based on income, You take that fireman, for example. He should get it before a millionaire. I have no problem with that. But the idea that people have to wait when the wait is, 2 years, and live where during those 2 years and run up all the expense of that. So, again, part of what is in that bill, where it may conflict with federal statute, is to point out to the federal government in a very strong way that, hey, maybe you ought to look at these policies and see if they can be revisited. Notwithstanding that, the fact is that the federal policy, the federal law would supersede. So, I don't understand the argument that Senator Connors and others made that, well, we're going to jeopardize federal funding when, in fact, we're going to follow all the federal guidelines that